Welcome, everybody. Let me begin by acknowledging that we're meeting tonight on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to other elders who may be present. I think the traditional acknowledgement of the land is particularly relevant tonight because we are actually going to talk quite a lot about place, about memory, about identity. I'm Dennis Altman. I've been writing for a long time about sex and politics. I was asked before, had I written about them separately or together? And I said, no, I'd written about them together. I think that's part of the reason why the Wheeler Centre invited me to interview André Aciman. It's been an enormous pleasure and privilege for me to be able to read so much of André's writings over the last few months. And at the risk of totally disappointing some of you, our discussion tonight is not going to talk about the turning of Call Me By Your Name to a film. It's going to talk rather about some of the things that come up through the opus of André's work. And I wanted to begin by actually noting, André, a couple of things that we share. I found it fascinating. We're both Jews, but you're Sephardic and I'm Ashkenazi.
I'm better.
You see, he's already made the point. I don't need to say anything further. But there was one point that really struck me, and I think this was the moment when I felt, oh, I like this guy. It's when in Enigma Variations, your last book, which we'll encourage you to all rush out and buy at the end of the program, Paul has a problem because he has bursitis in his shoulder from playing tennis. André, I have a problem in my shoulder from playing tennis, and I thought, okay, I like this. But I want to start with your life. And I want to start by asking you a number of questions that come out of this wonderful memoir, Out of Egypt, although I'm actually going to start pushing you to think about whether, in fact, memoir is the appropriate term. But can I start off by asking you, which is your first language?
Good question. The language that they spoke at home was French, but it was a strange French. And my grandparents spoke Ladino, which is a form of Spanish Yiddish, for those of you who don't know. And so that was the language of the seniors, was Spanish. And my parents spoke French, but my mother was totally deaf. And so she spoke French, but most people couldn't understand what she was saying, except for me. So I had to translate. And then suddenly we became Italian citizens, and I had to sort of learn Italian. And so we hired a Greek woman to teach us Italian. The whole thing is a mess. And at home, of course, there was a servant, and in the street, and that was Arabic. So I don't know what my mother tongue is, but I think it's French, but I'm not sure.
Do you know what language you dream in?
I don't remember.
Because I think I was fascinated by this because I grew up, I'm one generation in a sense different in that my parents were the refugees and the immigrants, whereas you yourself had the experience of being a refugee and a migrant at least twice, if not 3 times.
In my father's case, it was 3 times.
Yeah.
Because he was born in Turkey, left Turkey, went to Egypt, left Egypt, went to France, and then eventually immigrated to the United States. I only had 2. But as somebody says in my book, you know, as Jews, you lose everything you own at least twice in your life. And in my father's case, it was an understatement.
And there is it's wonderful you said that because there was actually something, there's a quote where you're talking to your father and your father asks you, what country are you a citizen of? And you're not sure. Or at least you are sure, but your father says, no, you're wrong, you're not sure.
That's right. He said, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Right.
And I said, oh, I want to be a diplomat, because everybody in my family claimed they were diplomats. And so I said, I want to be a diplomat. And he said, well, very good. And of what country? I said, oh, France, of course. He says, you're not French. I said, oh, I'm not. He said, no, you're really Turkish. And all I had heard growing up was that Turkey was an awful, barbaric place. This is why my family had left Turkey. So whether they were right or wrong is irrelevant. The fact is that I was humiliated. I thought I was French, and suddenly I find out that I'm only Turkish. So we became Italian right away.
And I have to say, when reading you, I kept thinking about Nabokov. I kept thinking about this wonderful presence of somebody who's grown up outside the English-speaking world, but then masters the art of writing in English so beautifully. And I mean, I have to say, I found Out of Egypt an extraordinarily moving book. But I wonder at what point there is a real distinction between memoir and fiction. Because it strikes me that in some ways, Out of Egypt is a novel, even though it is consciously presented as your memories.
Well, I tried to tell the publisher, they had it under history, you have to realize. And I said, there's absolutely nothing historical in this book. So they said, well, we'll call it a memoir then. And I said, that's fine, but I really wrote it as if it were a novel. And so I was using the facts of my life as using the conventions of fiction. Mm-hmm. Most of it is not made up, but the book reads as if it's a novel, and I love that about it.
Well, I loved it too. I mean, this is what I found so interesting, but it does raise for me much bigger questions about the distinction between memory and imagination. And I mean, I think we would probably both agree that that distinction is not clear.
It is not. And in fact, they are strange bedfellows. They sleep together, but they don't talk to each other.
I am not going to start talking about my experiences.
With memory or...
of people who sleep together but don't talk to each other.
They call each other by their names, you know that.
Well, except, as we know from Call Me By Your Name, that becomes the final test of intimacy, right?
Yes.
It's the willingness to swap the name. We will leave Out of Egypt. I'm reluctant to leave Out of Egypt, but I do actually want to talk a little bit about place, because I think one of the things that I found runs through all your writing is a very strong sense of place. I said to André before that reading Out of Egypt, you know, I'm a bit of a geek. I wanted to have a map in front of me of the old tram routes in Alexandria. But I think place, for example, in Harvard Square, which I think is one of the novels available outside on the book table, it's enormous. It's framed in a way by the geography of a very small part of Cambridge, Massachusetts, right?
Right.
And that's deliberate, obviously.
Yes, because I'm so close-minded that whatever was not Harvard Square was of no interest to me. So I never went to Boston. I mean, I had to go occasionally, but basically I had no interest in Boston, and Somerville didn't even exist in my world. And Somerville is just contingent on Cambridge.
Well, I should perhaps explain, as someone who's also spent time at Harvard, that of course, for people at Harvard, Boston is irrelevant.
Yes.
The world begins and ends at Harvard Square, right?
That's right. That's what I wanted to capture.
Which you capture. I mean, I did share with you, André, that I even remember a couple of the cafes you write about. I think we should probably talk a little bit now about the most recent book, Enigma Variations. But what strikes me is there is a line that runs through, I think, all your books, and that is a search for love and the meaning of love and the contradictions and sometimes, I think, the melancholy that is associated with love.
Yeah.
Is that a fair comment?
Yes, I think love is difficult business. I think desire is even more complicated because love is, you know, I don't even know what it is, but desire I do know because you can almost locate it, certainly in your body, and in your heart and in your imagination, and at night it haunts you. Mm-hmm. but the thing about desire, which I've always found desire very interesting, is particularly to write about, because you can't quite contain it, you can't capture it, you can only allude to it or sort of hope that something radiates from it. And one of the things that I always associate with desire is that desire forces you to do something about it. In other words, when you desire someone, you have to tell them that you have desire, but that's the hard part. And so in every time I've desired somebody, I was combated by an arresting sense of shame, in that I couldn't really say to them what I wanted to say. And so I had to make allusions. Or, you have an extra drink, and that becomes easy, But it's the drink that is doing the talking, not you. But I found, so I don't know. The one thing I dread about desire is when you live with someone that you have desired, and the conditions are altered. And as I love to say, on Sunday afternoon, you do your laundry together, and you fold the towels together. And that is not very interesting to your body.
I'm refraining. All sorts of images suddenly came into my head.
Did you see the people actually folding towels together? And well, you do the towels, I'll do the sheets. No, let's do them together. Okay, fine. It's totally dreadful. I mean,
I'm actually going to skip forward a little bit through my notes because desire has come up. And I think that what to me was so important about, particularly, I think, Call Me By Your Name, because that is now so known through both the book and the film, is the fact that desire and identity are not identical.
Right.
And I actually wanted to quote something written by the English author Jonathan Dollimore, and get your comment on it. And I think we should talk a little bit about that difference, where John Dollimore says, it's one of the delusions of identity politics to think that our desire comfortably coexists with our identity, a belief which has more to do with consumerism than desire. And I think that's an interesting way of putting it.
Yes, I think I agree with it. I don't know what I mean, this is perhaps the thing that I've been circling around, is that I don't know what identity is. I have no idea. And certainly I don't know what my identity is. I don't know, I mean, I grew up Jewish, but I hated religions. And my father eventually, out of political reasons, converted to Protestantism. And I hated that too. And because I couldn't take it seriously. I mean, are we really, who are we fooling, Dad? The Egyptians were certainly not fooled. But I mean, that's one aspect. And then there's nationalities, and I don't know what nationality I really belong to, and I don't even know, as we were discussing before, I don't even know how to pronounce my last name. And my first name is really a problem as well. It's André, but it's really André. But if you pronounce it that way, then you have to roll the R's, which is not correct in Paris. And so every attempt at sort of narrowing me down turns out to sort of falls flat on its face. And when it comes to sexuality, God, I have no idea.
But I think this. I heard a number of, I think, very silly comments after Call Me By Your Name was transformed into a film. And I think the silliest comment was a complaint that straight men were allowed to play the roles.
Oh.
You hadn't heard that one?
I have heard it.
But it struck me as so absolutely absurd. And of course, if you reverse it, is it then saying that a gay actor
cannot play a straight man?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think that was the point that Dollimore is making, and that is so clear to me in reading Call Me By Your Name. It's not, as some people want it to be, it's not a coming out story.
I don't think it is.
No.
Although there is a coming out scene when, the father and the son have a conversation together, and that's important. But it's more, I think, look, I mean, on one hand, it is a gay story, and on the other hand, it's a story about just love. And I hate people who want to talk about the love aspect and not the gay part, or people who want to focus only on the gay part and not the love. And the coming out or the coming of age is, I think, irrelevant. I mean, certainly the coming of age, because basically Elio knows what he wants. He's not coming of age to it. He's already knows. He's had sex quite a bit before in all kinds of ways. So this is not new to him, you know. And so I think we can't, again, you can't narrow it down to something that's convenient and packaged.
No, and I think, as I say, I was struck by the attempts to do this by a number of people who I think were led to, I mean, let's be honest, there were people who were led to the book by the film, in many cases. But I want to go back, though, to this question of melancholy. And in fact, there's a maybe sad, wistful moment in Harvard Square. Harvard Square is, I'll ask you actually to explain, because Harvard Square is essentially the encounter between two very different men, right?
Yes.
And maybe you can explain that, and then let me give you the particular quote that I'd like you to talk about.
Okay. No, it's a story. It's a true story. I was a graduate student at Harvard, hating being a graduate student, which is why I was there, because I hated it. And he was a cab driver, and he was an Arab from Tunisia, and we became friends. And I was Jewish, he was an Arab, and it absolutely didn't matter because I couldn't take Jewishness seriously. He couldn't take Islam seriously. We were both sort of interested in women, and this is what he did all the time. He was picking up women, and sometimes he was so good at it, he said, you know, you should really date so-and-so, she's really interested in you. And I did, and it was, so anyway. We became very, very good friends. Eventually, he got kicked out of the United States because it turns out he was already married. Who knows? It was a mess. But anyway, I think that gives you the sense of it.
It does. And it's this wonderful encounter within this very strange, privileged enclave.
Yes.
That the narrator is part of and the cab driver can't be part of.
Right.
But the sentence that really I thought would be interesting to have you talk about is Kalash, is that how I should pronounce it?
Well, that was his nickname, Kalashnikov, because he
Yes.
spoke as if he were spewing bullets out of his mouth. And so people called him Kalashnikov.
Yeah. And Kalashnikov says, sex is how we reach out to the world when we have nothing else to offer the world. I thought, what a wonderful sentence.
Well, because for him, sex was how he approached everything around him, because it was the one thing he had in common with all these women and all these very patrician women and not very patrician waitresses, and he basically that evened up the field for him, so that he could be as good as anybody else when it came to sex. Otherwise, he was a cab driver who wasn't quite established, didn't always have money, borrowed this, didn't always have a place to sleep at, so sometimes he would sleep in my living room. It was a messy life, but when it came to finding women, that was what he was good at, because it was the last thing he had to give.
And I'm fascinated that now you're saying I think, am I right that all your novels are written in the first person?
All of them are,
Yeah.
yes.
And I think this goes back to my point about the blurred line between memoir and fiction. Clearly you are not the I of all these books.
No. In some of them I am not, but in Harvard Square, I definitely am.
Yeah. And
it reads like a novel.
As I said, it reads it reads very much. In fact, in some ways it reads more like a novel than Enigma Variations, where you're beginning to play with the form of novel.
Right.
And I was curious, I don't know the music particularly well of Enigma Variations. And I don't think anywhere in the book you actually explain why you chose that title. No. Am I right?
I didn't know. I did not. Do you want me to?
You know, I'm the interrogator. Of course I want you
Okay.
to.
Well, I can't see you, so I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but Enigma Variations is a piece of music that Sir Edward Elgar composed. And what fascinated me is that, you know, they're all variations. There is also mention of the Goldberg variation or the Diabelli variations by Beethoven. These are, you get the theme, and then you have variations, sometimes 30 and more. In the case of Enigma Variations, we have the variations, but we don't have the main theme on which the variations are based. So you don't know what the origin of this piece of music is. And my book is essentially 5 different moments in the life of a man that don't have a source. You don't know what the source is because the character himself has no idea what the source is. He is constantly sort of flummoxed. He doesn't know anything about whether his sexuality is this way or that way, and certainly both. And then he claims at some point, I wish I didn't belong this or here or somewhere, just somewhere in the middle. Is there a middle? And there is no middle.
But he also is aging, isn't he? And that
Yes.
to me is very important because the 5 moments begin when Paul is, I think, a teenager.
He's 12.
Yep. And they end when he's besotted with a younger woman and very unsure how far he can push it.
Yes.
And constantly scared of being rebuffed.
Scared of being rebuffed. He doesn't want to ruin the friendship. That's what it's called. And he doesn't want to ruin it, but of course he wants something of her and he doesn't know whether it's even legitimate to ask anything. And then you find out that he has another obligation and I'm not going to give it away.
Well, it struck me that by the end of the book he had a number of obligations. I wasn't sure I could keep them all apart.
That's right.
But I think I think it's in Enigma Variations. I may be wrong, but I think it's there that you muse on the difference between remorse and regret.
Yes.
And that fascinated me, and yes, I do want you to explain to the audience, who may not all have read Enigma Variations as carefully as I have, what you meant there.
Well, it's essentially because I'm very interested in how things in the past and how things in the future and in the present sort of meld. And I'm very bad with the present. I'm always remembering or anticipating or fantasizing. And the question becomes, when you feel remorse, remorse is because you've done something and you wish you hadn't. Regret is when you haven't done something and you wish you had. And it's like the seesawing between these 2 absolutes that are paralyzing the character of Paul. And I've always felt that applies to myself as well, is there are many things I should have done and I didn't do and I will never be able to do. And there are certain things I have done and wished I hadn't done. But the guilt is not paralyzing as much as the regret is. Regret is really a very powerful feeling.
And if we think of the ending of Call Me By Your Name with Elio and Oliver, do they feel regret or do they feel remorse or do they feel neither?
I don't think they feel remorse. Regret, the reader feels, I think, because the reader feels, God, they should have stayed together. And I'm saying to them, you know what, they could still be together, by the way. That is certainly an open possibility,
Yes.
which is not being discounted. So we don't know. We don't know. But again, it's this weird moment in life, and I think our lives are filled with these moments of what I call the might have beens that never happened but could still happen, though you wish it couldn't. You want me to repeat the sentence? I made a profession out of that sentence because it defines exactly what I am. Might have been, hope it could still come about, but you really don't mean it. And no, but I still do. No, you don't. And it's in that, if you had to map it out, you wouldn't know how to do so because it's impossible to grasp.
And I think that it's picking up on that I use the word melancholy. It strikes me that running through all your writing is a melancholia, which is perhaps a mixture of remorse and regret, a sense of infinite possibilities, and as soon as you make a decision, some of those possibilities are lost.
They're lost, yes, because part of it is because if you're like me, you know very well that once you make the move to make it happen, there's a countervailing impulse that says, do you really want to do this? No, I don't. But you wanted to? Yes, I did. and you can't make up your mind. The worst sort of situation I can describe is when you happened, and when I was much younger, of course, you ended up in someone's bedroom, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, after the business that you were going to do is completed, you say, "How do I get home?" And of course the door is open, but there are no cabs, and it's very far away. So it's that sense, do I want to put myself in a position where I have to go home, and I know I'll want to, but it's not going to be perceived well, and I'm going to burn the bridge, and so on. So you end up, when you're like me, you create all these scenarios that fundamentally have one purpose, is to paralyze you. But I'm sure you're all different.
Well, yes, I mean, I'm sure we have an audience, none of whom have experienced this. But I think that's the wonderful thing that you capture, and that is a universal experience in some ways.
I think so.
And it's one that probably most of us find difficult to articulate. But I am struck by, clearly you enjoy writing.
Yes.
And I had this sense that for you, writing has a therapeutic element.
Yes. I put on paper things that I cannot do in life, or that I wish I could do, or wish I had done and I didn't do. So writing becomes a vehicle in which I revisit those wonderful moments of my life that may not have ended up the way I wanted them at the time, but they're wonderful nonetheless, and I want to hold on to them before I lose them.
Now there is, I should promise you, I'm not going to ask you about the current state of American politics, and therefore this is going to be different to
I wanted to discuss now.
Oh, well, in that case, I might. I'm assuming you don't want to.
I don't want to at all.
But I do want, there is one moment, and in fact, what is striking is how little you talk about politics, even though politics in a big sense runs through clearly the history of the family.
Yes.
and the expulsion from Egypt. And they're wonderful insights, but at no point, I think, do you specifically take political positions.
That's right.
But there is one moment that I did want you to reflect on, where you do actually make, in a sense, a very interesting political point. And you're quoting, okay, your cousin Arnaud. I'm not quite sure who Arnaud is, but okay, your cousin Arnaud, who wants the whole family to move to France.
Right.
This is when, after the Suez War in 1956, Jews in Egypt are facing the likelihood of expulsion, right?
Correct.
And Arnaud says, if we can't say what we think under our roof, then we have no roof. I think that's a wonderful sentence. I think this is where you are being political.
I know, but I'm making fun of him. But it's basically, he's right. If you cannot have free speech under your roof in your own home, then what kind of home is this? We should leave. And the question is that most of the family did not leave. They stayed in Egypt, and eventually each one in their turn was expelled. Arnaud was not. He went to France and eventually became a lawyer and did well for himself. But by and large, he felt that this could not be a home. How could you be in your home where you can't even say what you feel? The truth is, if you think about it, most homes in dictatorships are not free to say what they have to say, because there's always going to be a child who's going to rat on the parents without meaning to, a servant who is overhearing and will report you to the police. There are always people, neighbors will hear, so you always whisper. And it's funny, I have a friend who lives on Place des Vosges, which is the most prestigious place in Paris. And he's Jewish, and whenever he wants to discuss the Jewish situation in France, about France, he closes the windows because he lives on the first floor and he's always afraid that people will hear. And this reminded me, of course, immediately of our lives in Egypt. You couldn't speak, you had to shut the door, you had to shut the window, and it's a horrible way to live. So I was being political. Mm.
And I think the sense of being an exile, which is your own story, in some ways still resonates, even when we're in what appears to be very comfortable, middle-class Manhattan, Brooklyn, dinner parties on each side of the Brooklyn Bridge. There still, to me, is this sense of maybe this is temporary.
Yes, yes, maybe this is temporary. Everything is temporary. And the sense that we belong in this place, we've had family here for years, all our wealth is committed to this place, cannot be real for me. I always still feel that there's something fugitive about the present, even when you're comfortable. This could be taken away, this could be lost. You could make a wrong investment, the government could change. Many things, many mishaps can occur that will eventually take away. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you being Jewish, that this is a very typical Jewish feeling of instability that is fundamentally sort of there.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I hardly drink alcohol, and I joke it's because I have some ancestral fear of the Tartars descending.
While you're drunk?
Well, they're drunk. But I think you're. But I think that what is happening here is that most Jews have in their family history stories of exile and displacement.
Yes.
So I don't think it is actually about being Jewish. It's the reality that being Jewish means you are more likely. And of course, we're in a country that has many people who have those stories.
Exactly.
As are you. And I think that we're not, unless you really wanted to talk about politics, which I sort of had assumed you didn't.
No.
No.
No, but I do think that the instability that you experience as an exile, as a displaced person, also manifests in your intellect, in your professional choices, in your amorous life, in your sexuality. Everything becomes sort of, it's like a floating island. Nothing is very stable. And you're aware of it. And you're always aware that your moments are counted. In other words, they may be taken away from you. And when you lose a job, so most people are devastated. So was I once. But I had it coming, after all, because that's what happens. You lose a job. Mm-hmm. These things are supposed to happen. I'm not surprised. I am hurt.
And of course, if we go back to the questions of identity and sexuality, part of the experience of anyone whose sexuality is not the conventional mainstream will to some extent feel an outsider. And they will have that experience of being an outsider. And I think this is why people want to read into so much of your writing a sexual liberationist message that I'm not sure is really there.
It is there because it is the assumption of all my books that the sexual liberation has occurred. It is already in place. We're not debating it. And that has to do with the fact that I was lucky enough to have a father who was extremely open-minded. So open-minded that the stuff that I was bringing in from the streets in 1967, 68, for him was a joke. He says, why are you getting carried away by this? This is nonsense. But my father was a man who basically taught me the most important sexual lesson I could ever have learned, because nobody ever had said it to me. And most people will never have the open-mindedness. He says, once you've taken off your clothes with someone, everything is permitted. And when you're told that at the age of 15, 16, yes, it makes you feel, oh, wow. He says, of course, you're not going to hurt someone, but by and large, their inhibition, shame, reluctance, all these things have no place in a sexual relationship, in a sexual moment, let's say. And that was, for me, an eye-opener. And most of the kids that I was in school with would never have understood that. They were basically clamoring over many issues that had the tangential reference to sexual liberation. But the idea that when you're naked with somebody, everything is okay, there should never be any shame, was new. And I wanted the father in Call Me By Your Name not to say that, but to say something that was very, very close to it.
Which she does. And there is that very powerful scene And I think in a sense, I said we wouldn't talk about the film, but there's one moment when I think we can talk about the film, because for a lot of people, that final speech by the father in the film is enormously significant.
It is.
And if you read the book, it is also enormously significant. And I could see echo. I mean, I came to it in the wrong order because I'd read Call Me By Your Name before I read Out of Egypt. But I think there are moments in Out of Egypt where you already get a sense of this from your father.
Yes.
Can I ask you, I want to go back to the fact that you're a writer. And this is you're at a writers' festival in Sydney. We're at a writers' centre in Melbourne. But I'm curious, you have written a great deal. Where do you see yourself going as a writer? Is Enigma Variations leading you in new directions?
Not really. I'm still interested I'm interested in the magic of relationships. I'm interested in not the relationship itself, that I leave to other writers, lesser writers. Took you a while, didn't it? I'm interested in the magic of romance, because I think it is the absolutely most beautiful moment when two individuals realize, oh, we like each other. She likes me, I like her. There's a moment does she really? Yes, she does. And it's absolutely wonderful when this coalescence of two individuals discover this absolutely wonderful thing called intimacy. And it's marvelous. And life will come in the way and usually does something to it. But by and large, that is what interests me. It's the absolute poetry, the beauty of two individuals meeting together. So I wrote a book, which unfortunately nobody can read because it's so laborious. But it basically took that idea of two individuals, a woman and a man, who meet at a party, and it is clear from get-go that they're attracted to each other, except that they don't want to really have sex right away, because that will eventually lead into one direction only. And so they kind of drag it out for about 8 nights until they're basically ready to explode. But the reader has no patience for that. So I understand that readers can't read it. But I needed to write this because I just love the fact that they're going to talk about the fact that they're not having sex. Well, do we need to? No, not yet. Okay, fine, another day. But I take a theme sort of borrowed from Eric Romer, who was my favorite movie director, French, and basically seldom had sex in his films, but really put a man and a woman in the same room, sometimes in the same bed, and talking about desire and love and whatever.
And we're talking about 8 White Nights.
Yes.
Yes. And I said to you I hadn't read it. I have actually read parts of it. And this is the problem with reading books on Kindle when you're traveling. But what struck me was the number of references to music.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is something quite important in their lives and important in your life.
Yes, but it's in all my books. There's always plenty of classical music. People listen to classical music because I think it basically formalizes the search for beauty in their lives. We are all searching for beauty and happiness, and certainly some joy. And for me, music has always provided undiluted joy. There's never been we never broke up with music. We're still in love. And for me, that reminds me that there are certain things in life that you can count on being the same. And you can actually pass on your love for music to somebody that you love. It's something that you can share, but at the same time, there's a wonderful moment in Enigma Variation when the father and the son are sitting together on a rock overlooking the bay of somewhere in southern Italy. And the father says, as they're discussing the 31st Diabelli variation, says, I want you to remember this moment because there'll be a day when, And the son says, okay, Dad, stop it, okay? But the number 31 variation, which I urge you all to listen to, is a very beautiful one. And it's basically the father saying, I have nothing to give you, but I can talk to you about this music. And please remember me through it. And he doesn't say it that way. But,
no, but I mean, I should have said at the beginning, when I was talking about the things that I felt we had in common, one of them certainly is a sense of the centrality of classical music. And I did say to André before how exciting it was for me to be on this stage tonight, because the last time I was in the Athenaeum was to see a quite extraordinary operatic production of one of Donizetti's Tudor operas. I'm curious whether you're worried, as many people of our generation are, that there is a declining interest, understanding and love of classical music.
Yes, I'm worried. I hate it. But you see, the problem is that classical music is becoming very elitist, and it is perceived as elitist and privileged, to use another horrible word. And I don't want it to be. I want it to be as ordinary as anything else, as ordinary as watermelon, as lasagna, you know, because I like lasagna. But classical music is intimidating and off-putting to some people, and therefore they don't even want to have any commerce with it. And that upsets me. I find that most people say, why don't you put rock music in your book since you like music so much? It's not the same thing. There's something that is enchanting and arresting about some pieces of classical music. And you can't say, okay, they're listening to, I don't know, David Bowie instead. It doesn't work. I like David Bowie, by the way. But it's not the same thing.
No, and of course, again, I think if we go back to Call Me By Your Name, both the book and the film, it's important that Elio plays the piano.
Yes, he does.
And he plays, and that is related to the growth of the relationship.
It is. There's that wonderful moment, and I think, may I talk about the movie for 1 second?
Please, because the audience will. So we're now going to segue into the movie.
No, there's that beautiful piece which we don't know if it's by Bach or not, though most people claim it's by Bach. It's about, he's basically saying goodbye to his brother, which is clearly a theme in the film itself. It's a separation of the two brothers, and Bach composed this on leaving his brother. And it's a piece of music that Elio plays on the guitar, and then Oliver says, oh, that's nice, play it again. And he goes into the piano and plays it the way Liszt would have changed it, and then says, oh, why did you change it? Well, Liszt did it. Then he plays it again in the way that Busoni would have done it, and at that point, Oliver says, okay, I get it. And because he's the kind of guy who would walk out of the room, he walks out of the room, and at that point, Elio plays it the way Bach had originally, and he walks right back in and sits down and listens to it, which I thought was so beautiful. I mean, you can do this with any piece of music, but that particular piece of music is so beautiful.
And it is, of course, in a sense, the same idea as the variation.
Yes.
Yes.
It is a variation, yes.
Yeah. I think we're sort of, because André, against my better judgment, has now raised the film, and because I suspect there are many people who want to ask questions about the film, we might actually start moving towards questions.
Hi, André. How are you?
Hello.
I'm really interested in how perfectly you capture that feeling of longing in love. I love everything that you write about love, but particularly the longing aspect. I think that's not something that's really explored in a lot of other books, but you capture it perfectly. Could you talk to it a bit?
About longing? Longing is when you long for something. Why did I do this? I didn't need to do this. No, it is very difficult because longing is something that has no age. You can long for someone at the age of 12, as is the character in Enigma Variations, without knowing anything about sex. That's the important part of it. In other words, you long for someone and you don't know what you want from them. But you can long for someone when you're 70, 80. You can still long for people and desire them in all kinds of ways. And that never changes. And longing it doesn't have an itinerary. You can't make a map or a chronology or a trajectory for longing. It has moments and then it subsides. It fights itself. It doesn't want to exist, but then it does exist. It surges and goes away. And it's constantly tussling with itself and with the person that is desired. And so when you have a character like Elio, all you can do is have him think those thoughts by himself, alone, constantly, which I think is one of the reasons why a lot of readers and people have seen the film like this thing, this particular, I don't know what to call it, this way of presenting desire, because it doesn't go out of himself. It stays inside of him, but he's constantly examining it and re-examining it and cannot talk about it. And eventually he sort of bungles what he means to say, and there's a kind of an eruption of a sentence that has absolutely no meaning, but it does have a meaning for Oliver. And that is when Oliver comes back and asks him a question, which provides an answer that is equally evasive, and so on. But that is just after the longing occurs. And longing can also happen after a relationship is over. You still long for the person. And the father says, at some point you will wake up in the middle of the night and you will go crazy because your longing will basically look for that person, and that person is not going to be on this continent. I mean, he could also be gone totally from life. Anyway, I don't know that this is the answer you wanted, or if it satisfies you.
I remember something the Australian writer Christos Tsiolkas said after Barracuda was turned into a television series, which many of us will have seen, and Christos said he could enjoy it once he could disconnect from the book that he had written, and he could look at it as a separate work of art. Do you have that same feeling?
No, because I look at the film, and it was, in many ways, so faithful, because entire segments of the book were carried into the film in dialogue form, that as I'm seeing the film, the first time I saw it, I could remember writing those words. And so I couldn't disconnect, and I loved it. There were some surprises, and for me, the most significant surprise was the final scene, which was not in the book, and yet was as powerful as the final scene in the book, and done in a totally different convention than in the novel. But for me, it worked. I think the film does justice to the story, and even though the story goes on for another 20 years, the film does not need to do that. It stops at some point.
It does.
And maybe there's going to be a sequel, we don't know.
Hello, André, I'm Patrick.
Hello.
I just recently read the letter you received from a man who had read Call Me By Your Name and spoke to, or he spoke about how it affected him so profoundly. And now tonight I was wondering, have you received any other very important letters regarding your other works that maybe speak to people's experience of exile or identity?
When I wrote Out of Egypt, essentially many people who had left Egypt the same way I left, in other words, expulsion, expropriation, and so on, said that all I needed to do was change the names of my characters, and I had their family. So, and a lot of people wrote to me about having been exiled from Egypt. But then those letters petered off. Then I wrote Call Me By Your Name, and I got a lot of mail from people who were in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who were very upset. I mean, loved the book, but were upset because it reminded them that they never had the kind of conversation that Elio has with his father. In other words, they felt that the father had long been dead, and that that particular moment was crystallized in the novel as something that should have happened in their lives and never did. Then the years go by, and then the movie comes out, and people sort of rush to see the movie. They rush to buy the book, and they write to me, and I get all kinds of mail. Most people have written about 8 White Nights, and they've written about Enigma Variations by saying how beautiful the book is. But when it comes to Call Me By Your Name, now the mail I get is, you've captured my life, you've taught me something, you've basically made me realize what I should do with the rest of my life. And I do get, of course, emails that say, I'm going to tattoo this sentence. Is that okay with you on my body? And I'm saying, please don't ask me this, but think about it. Think about it. I say, well, I wanted to tattoo a peach also. I said, no. No, but I can't say no. But essentially, to go back to your question, I'm going to tell you about this letter, which I wrote about because it was so moving. It's about a man who buys a copy of the book at some airport, which I won't name, and flies across the United States and reads the book and then says, I had to leave the book on the airplane because, you see, I am married and I have children, and my lover, because the book re-evoked in him the memory of the lover, died of AIDS. His name was such and such. And he says, my name is not important. So he doesn't even sign the letter. But I was extremely moved by that. I get very moving letters. But this one, because it was not going to sort of reveal its identity, was more arresting for me, and I kept it. And 10 years later, I wrote this article about all the mail I got about Call Me By Your Name, and how moving some of it was, truly moving. I got a letter from somebody who said, you know, you've taught me about love. I mean, she said, you told me about the beauty of love, but now I'm in my 70s, and I don't think it's ever going to happen in my life, and I'm very sad. I mean, what do you say to somebody like that? There's nothing you can say. Thank you for sharing.
And I think we've got a question over here.
Hi, I'm honest. I didn't read the book Call Me By Your Name, but I watched the movie. So
that's fine.
Yeah. My question actually is about the movie. So the movie is setting in Italy, but Italians are very marginal in the movie. There are no interaction really. And the Italian characters in the movie are not really Italians. In one sense, are servants or someone cooking. Or there are a couple, they talk about politics, but are a little bit a stereotype of Italians. I'm just asking why, if it's like an artistic choice, or there is some particular reason why. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, there's no reason. The real fact is that we wanted to have a family that was pluralistic, multilingual and pluralistic. And it was about the family, the father, the mother, the guest, Oliver, the boy. And then there are two. There's Mafalda, the maid, and there's the gardener, who have absolutely no role. And there's a girlfriend that shows up sort of incidentally, almost episodically. But that's it. There was no interest in going beyond the family. It was not going to be a sort of a portrait of the Italian family, or the portrait of a typical village in northern Italy. We didn't want to do that.
Okay, I think, yes, over there, I can see someone.
Hey, Andre. Where did the inspiration for the love story behind Call Me By Your Name come from? Were you inspired by personal events?
It's a good question. No, actually. But that's not an honest answer. The real answer is that everything that I've written in the book is really a collage of many, many things that have occurred in my life, or that have occurred in the lives of my friends, and that they've told. People tell me everything. Just give somebody a drink and they'll tell me their whole life. Give them 2 drinks and then we don't want to discuss. No, the real issue is that it's not my life, although many people have come up to me after Call Me By Your Name was published, and they said something like, was that me? And I always say, yeah. And everybody's happy. But no, it's not true. One person identified herself in the book, and she was right. It was about her. But she was just an incidental moment in the relationship. I have never put my head in somebody's bathing suit. I have never done anything naughty with a fruit. Honestly, these are the things that I have not done. I know I have not. How have I come up with them is beyond me. I don't understand how somebody could actually be sick enough to imagine doing something to a poor fruit that didn't mean anything.
I think we're getting a line over here. So we are getting a line. So could I ask people, please ask your question briefly, and maybe we'll take a couple and then give André a chance to respond to a couple of you. Okay?
Hi. I was just wondering, specifically with Call Me By Your Name and with Enigma Variations, why the age gap? Like, do they see what they could be or themselves? Like, do they see themselves in each other? Like, is that why, or just wondering why?
Okay, can we take one more? And then I think there's a line there. So if we can take two more quickly, André, and then let you respond.
I'll try to remember them.
I will make a note. Okay.
Hi. Love and intimacy are explored pretty heavily in Call Me By Your Name in a way that I think is so fairy tale-like, and it's so hard to believe that that kind of love could even happen in our real world. Do you think that it really is something that a normal person could find?
Not a normal person.
Okay, one more question, then I will,
Hi, André. I was just wondering, did you feel fear in trusting your words into a filmmaker's gaze? And as an author, how did you want to be involved in the deeply personal adaptation process?
Okay,
I think, André, do you want to reply to those three?
Yes. As far as being an author, I love the idea that James Ivory was writing the script. I love the idea that Luca Guadagnino was going to direct the film. I love both their work, and I love Luca's particular optic on how he sees the world, particularly how he observes a family. And of course, he is the magic of the house and of the place. Everything becomes significant in his film. So I had absolutely no reservation. I didn't intrude. I didn't give one note to the movie as it was being done or about the screenplay when I saw it. I figured they know what they're doing. They're going to change it. I was expecting that. I think I'm the only author on this planet who has had that sort of generous attitude. And we did very well because we still are friends. So that's one. Now, the second question was about love. Was it? Does that kind of love can exist? Somebody once told me this was utopian sex. I don't think so. I think that this kind of love does exist. Intimacy exists. What I've been trying to say here tonight is that it may not last, or we don't know how to trust it enough to make it last. But it does exist. It's very powerful. And to be honest with you, some people go through their entire lives not knowing this. But I think if there is a mission statement in my work, and I doubt that there is because I'm not that kind of a person, it would be, there is that possibility. Here's a portrait of it. Copy it if you can. That's really what I would love to leave as a testament of my work. And the first question, now I've forgotten.
It was on the age gap.
Oh, the age gap. I think that Elio is young, he's 17. When I was 17, I desired people who were much older than I was. In fact, I didn't stop doing that until I was about 27. I always liked older people because they knew more and I could be irresponsible with them and sort of not necessarily take myself too seriously because that was their job. So I was putting it on them. And it worked beautifully. I've been very lucky in that respect, extremely lucky. I hope that the people who were older considered that my presence in their life was also a good thing. I think it was.
That's a rather wonderful point at which we need to end. On behalf of the audience, let me thank you, André. It's been wonderful to have the opportunity to meet and talk with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.